Matthew 24, an amazing chapter of puzzling prophecies. Many times Christians, after reading Matthew 24, they end up in opposing views regarding end times. What does Matthew 24 really say? Does Matthew 24 indicate a post-tribulation rapture, or does it still confirm a pre-tribulation rapture? Stay tuned to find out. Welcome to this episode. I am Marco Kiroglu from Countdown to Christ Ministries. Please subscribe to our channel, like, share, and comment on our videos. Now, Matthew 24 is an amazing, mind-boggling, and even confusing chapter of intense list of prophecies. I say intense because end-time prophecies from the lips of Jesus Christ are laid out one after another in a very short space of verses. And when Christians read this, it seems like they don't all end up in the same place. They seem to end up in opposing views. Many times, Christians who oppose pre-tribulational rapture teaching use the scriptures in Matthew 24 in the support of their argument. They use especially Matthew 24 from verse 29 down to 31. They use that section as a confirmation for post-tribulation rapture theory. Now, before I go and unpack this amazing prophecy and answer the question, the most important question I ask at the beginning of this video, does Matthew 24 confirm post-tribulation theory and reject pre-tribulation theory? Before I answer that question, before I unpack these prophecies, I want to remind you what this gospel is centered on. You know, the whole Gospel of Matthew was penned down by a Jewish author, Matthew, to a Jewish audience. So the Gospel of Matthew is a very Jewish-centric gospel. It is written for a Jewish audience. To be able to fully understand the Gospel of Matthew, one needs to put himself into the shoes of a Jew in the times this gospel was written. So it was not written for Gentiles. It was not written for believers from other parts of the world, but it was written specifically for Jewish readers. Now, also being a gospel, being an evangelical compilation of all that Jesus did and said and all that Jesus prophesied, it is, I even take one step further and I say it is written to the Jews who are not yet believers. It is written to the Jews who have not yet embraced Jesus. So, now let's get into, after establishing that fact, now let's get into unpacking these puzzling, mind-boggling prophecies. And there is a lot here. There is a lot, and it actually is amazing to me every time when I study this. You know, the first thing in Matthew chapter 24, Jesus prophesies is the destruction of the temple that was standing right there in Jerusalem while Jesus was walking and talking with his disciples. That is the second temple. This temple was standing in Jerusalem, and in chapter 24, from verse 1 to verse 2, Jesus prophesied the destruction of the temple. And as Jesus prophesied, literally exactly as he prophesied, in 70 AD, Romans came and destroyed this temple exactly in accordance with the prophecy of Jesus in Matthew chapter 24, verse 1 and 2. That is the beginning of this prophecy, and this prophecy, this first prophecy of Matthew 24 is fulfilled in 70 AD, as I just said. And then Jesus moves on to, when disciples ask questions, and then Jesus moves on to continuing in his prophetic proclamation. He continues continues to prophesy what will happen after the temple is destroyed. From verse 4 all the way down to verse 14, Jesus gives us an amazing summary of what will happen from the destruction of the second temple until the inauguration of the third temple. Now listen to me carefully here, please. What you are reading in Matthew 24 from verse 4 all the way down to verse 14 is actually a prophecy from the lips of Jesus in regards to what will transpire all over the world from the destruction of the second temple that happened in 70 AD until the inauguration of the third temple, which is not yet built. And if I want to summarize, for the sake of time, instead of reading it word by word, if I want to summarize what Jesus just said there, Jesus said, after the second temple is destroyed, there will be no temple in Jerusalem, and Jerusalem will be trampled. Jews will be scattered all over the world. There will be of course, Jesus did not use these words, but I am now reading what he said in the light of history. Inquisitions, pogroms, holocausts, and all kinds of wars and chasing and expelling and scattering Jews all over the world. Those things happened, and Jesus was prophesying these things. But on top of that, Jesus also prophesied in these few verses, he also prophesied about how the followers of Jesus will be persecuted all over the world because of his name's sake. And that is exactly what happened. From the destruction of the second temple in 70 AD until now, and it will continue in this pattern until the inauguration of the third temple, that Jews will experience this continuous being scattered around the world, being trampled by, being mistreated by people all over the world. Christians will continue to experience all kinds of persecution because of the name of Jesus. But Jesus said, but while all of this is happening, the gospel of Jesus will be proclaimed all over the world. Isn't that amazing? For me, this is the most mind-boggling, perfect, spot-on prophecy for the last 2,000 years. And Jesus just summarized the prophecy of the last 2,000 years only in a few sentences here as we read in Matthew 24 from verse 4 down to verse 14. And then after that, Jesus moves into telling us about the next major shift that will happen in world history. That is the building of the third temple. In Matthew chapter 24 from verse 15 down to verse 22, Jesus is prophesying what will happen right at the inauguration and afterwards, right at the inauguration of the third temple and afterwards. Now of course the third temple is not literally written here, but if you read it in combination of all that is written in the book of Daniel, especially regarding the last 7 years of Jews on earth, everything will make sense. Now, as I said, if you read these prophecies as an ignorant Gentile, you will misunderstand this. But if you read these prophecies from the perspective of a learned Jewish man who knows the prophecies of the Old Testament, things will begin to make sense for you. The audience of this book was not the ignorant Gentiles like us. It was the Jews who knew the Old Testament, who knew the prophecies. So therefore, whenever we read these prophecies as ignorant Gentiles, we misunderstand and we misinterpret them. It is inevitable because we just don't know what a Jew knows. Now, remember, that is the backdrop to this prophecy. You must keep that in your mind. Now, when Jesus, after he prophesied what will transpire all over the world after the second temple is destroyed, and then in chapter 24, verse 15, Jesus suddenly talks about this thing called abomination of desolation spoken by prophet Daniel. Now that takes us. A Jew knows this. Whenever Jesus told this, a Jew immediately, any Jew who knew the prophecies would immediately understand what Jesus was talking about. They immediately understood that Jesus is talking about this amazing, shocking prophecy, this terrifying prophecy in which an enemy of God will come and sit in the temple of God. But this was prophesied by Daniel. If we go to that prophecy, that is in Daniel 2, chapter 9, verse 27. And Jesus, after he has prophesied what will transpire after the destruction of the second temple, he goes into this thing. So Jesus, in his prophecy, assumed that the third temple will be built. Remember, if there is no temple, there cannot be an abomination sitting on the Holy of Holies in the temple. A Jew knows that. A Gentile doesn't seem to see it. But a Jew immediately understands, okay, the second temple is destroyed as Jesus prophesied. Jews are scattered all over the world as Jesus has prophesied. Jews have been expelled and deported and killed and murdered and burned in furnaces and they have been subjugated to most horrible treatments through inquisitions and pogroms and holocausts, and gospel has been preached all over the world, and even Christians have been persecuted because of the name of this Jewish Messiah. A Jew will see that, and they will immediately understand he is talking about what will transpire right after the destruction of the second temple. And then once he finished these statements, Jesus jumped on verse 15. He jumps straight onto abomination of desolation that will be in the temple. Now, what temple? Temple was just destroyed. Of course, Jesus is now assuming the third temple is built and inaugurated. Now, a Jew understands this detail as I just said. And then in the following verses, Jesus explains how the Jews must flee from Jerusalem when they see this abomination taking place in the third temple. And then Jesus even says, pray that your fleeing may not coincide with the day of Sabbath. Now, a Gentile doesn't understand this. A Gentile looks at it and he just says, okay, there's Sabbath, so it mustn't be on a Saturday. But a Jew understands that means Jerusalem will be in the hands of Jews again. Nation of Israel will be built again. Temple will be inaugurated again. And the observation of Sabbath will be implemented in full scale. Because if it wasn't so, Jesus wouldn't be concerned about saying that. What does the observation of Sabbath mean? Observation of Sabbath, fully implementing the observation of Sabbath means everything in the land of Israel will be shut down. No bus, no train, no ferry, no flight, nothing will operate. And if anybody wants to run away from point A to point B, he will get stuck. He won't be able to go anywhere. And if an enemy force who does not regard the day of Sabbath comes, a Gentile force, they will not be bound by the Sabbath regulations and they will move around freely, capture and kill Jews freely. That's what Jesus is saying here in the aftermath of the abomination of desolation that will sit in the newly inaugurated third temple, right here from verse 15 down to verse 22 in chapter 24. The next big detail is the coming of the Messiah, return of the King of Kings. Now, if you take all these details out of the picture, and if you just read this whole prophecy, this compilation of prophecies, as an ignorant Gentile, you won't see any of these details I tried to highlight. And if you don't see them, you will come to this in verse 29, and you will read, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and etc., etc., and the Son of Man will come. Now, as a Gentile, you will read this, and your first conclusion will be, well, here it says, the return of Jesus Christ will be at the end of the tribulation, and therefore the rapture will be at the end of the tribulation. There we go. I am post-tribulation rapture believer. That is the conclusion of millions of Gentile believers. Although they have a desire to understand Bible prophecy, because they cannot see these details I tried to explain to you, they end up misunderstanding the Bible prophecy. But as I said, remember, these are written to Jewish audience, and a Jewish audience understands the details which are not even specifically mentioned because they know the story from the prophets in the Old Testament. They know it as they know the back of their hands. Now, try to put yourself in the shoes of those Jews and read again Matthew 24, verse 29 down to 31. And suddenly you realize this. Hold on a minute. What's happening here? Especially, let's go back to verse 15. If the abomination of desolation is sitting in the temple, if the third temple is built, let's bring in the prophecies of Thessalonians 1, Thessalonians 2, and 1 Corinthians. Let's bring them in as well and add on to this picture. Suddenly we realize, hold on a minute, if the abomination of desolation is sitting in the temple, what is that? The abomination of desolation is Antichrist coming and sitting in the newly inaugurated temple and declaring himself to be God. That is the abomination of desolation based on Daniel and based on the book of Revelation. So if that has happened, that means 7-year peace treaty has been signed at least 3.5 years earlier. Can you follow the calculation here? Because Jews need time to build the third temple. We know from the details of Bible prophecy, we know that it is the 7-year peace treaty that the Antichrist will sign, will give the Jews the green light, international permission to build a third temple on the place of the mosque, Islamic mosque at the moment. That mosque will be blown out of its place somehow, either with an earthquake or by the Ezekiel 38 war. We don't know how, or maybe the Antichrist himself will blow it up so that Jews can build a third temple. So by the time we come to verse 15, we understand all of these things have happened already. Now, if the Antichrist came to the forefront and signed the 7-year peace treaty that was prophesied by Daniel in chapter 9, verse 27, that in correlation with 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, suddenly we realize, whoa. If those things happened, rapture also must have happened already. So you realize now, Matthew 24 verse 15 is after the rapture, after the signing of the 7-year treaty. In fact, it is after the building of the tabernacle, third temple. And in fact, it is talking precisely about the moment on which Antichrist will enter the third tabernacle, sit in the Holy of Holies, and will proclaim himself to be God. Do you understand that? So this is not talking about necessarily just any other time. This is a specific moment in human history. And this moment we can pinpoint in the light of the prophecies in the book of Daniel, in the book of Ezekiel, in the book of 1 Thessalonians, 2 Thessalonians, 1 Corinthians, and the book of Revelation. We know Matthew 24 verse 15 is the moment at the middle of the 7-year tribulation, right in the middle of the 7-year tribulation. About 3.5 years prior this verse, Antichrist signed the peace treaty with the Jewish nation. About that time, Muslim mosque is removed from where it stands now. The ground is cleared. Jews are given the green light and international support to build the third temple. Jews build the third temple, and the inauguration ceremony is being held. Antichrist enters to Jerusalem with his pomp and glory and with his entourage and with his armies. He goes straight to the third temple, sits in the Holy of Holies. And that's the abomination of desolation spoken by prophet Daniel in Daniel chapter 9 verse 27. And then he declares himself to be God. And Jews reject him. Then he gives the order to his armies to kill the Jews. And then begins what we read in the book of Revelation, that the 2/3 of Jews will be killed by the Antichrist. That great tribulation for the house of Jacob, the second half of the 7-year tribulation, the last 3.5 years on earth before the physical coming of Jesus Christ. And then, now, after I provided you with these details, now let's continue reading, and then we come to here in verse 29. Jesus says, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. And Jesus now talking about right at the end of this great tribulation that will be so terrible for the Jewish nation. And Jesus says, right at the end, I will come. You see, Matthew 24, verse 29 down to 30, does not at all contradict pre-tribulation rapture doctrine that is embedded in the gospel of Jesus Christ. In fact, it confirms Matthew pre-tribulation doctrine. But furthermore, the book of Matthew, the gospel of Matthew, is not written by a Gentile nor written for Gentile readers. It is written specifically to the Jewish readers. And I believe Jews will begin to understand this amazing prophecy in Matthew 24, especially after the rapture. Especially after the rapture, God will open their eyes and they will begin to see this. So I hope this video answers your question in regards to what does Matthew 24 teach regarding the timing of the rapture. Matthew 24 does not teach post-tribulation rapture. Matthew 24 does not contradict pre-tribulation rapture doctrine, which is embedded in the gospel of Jesus Christ. In fact, Matthew 24 confirms that doctrine. Keep your eyes on Jesus Christ. Pray for our ministry. Pray for me that I may continue to serve our God effectively. And also, if this ministry is a blessing to you, please consider supporting us with your donations. To do so, simply go to countuntochrist.com/donate. God bless you and goodbye until I see you again.